I always thought my Uncle Mauricio hung the moon. Growing up, he was the one who'd sneak me extra dessert at family gatherings and proudly display my childhood drawings in his office. That made his betrayal cut even deeper. My name is Amara, and I'm what you'd call the black sheep of the Warner family dynasty. While everyone else chases legal briefs and courtroom glory, I chase the perfect blend of colors across canvas. That difference never seemed to matter to my grandmother. She got me, in a way no one else did. Your art speaks truth, dear, she'd tell me, squeezing my hand while admiring my latest piece. Never let anyone dim that light. But now she was gone, and I stood in her empty study, watching Mauricio rifle through her desk drawers like a man possessed. The funeral had been just yesterday, and here he was, already acting like he owned the place, which technically he didn't. Where is it? He muttered, yanking open another drawer. Looking for something specific? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He jumped, then composed himself with a practiced smile. Amara, didn't hear you come in, just trying to get Mama's affairs in order. Funny, I thought the will reading wasn't until tomorrow. His smile tightened. Just being proactive. Someone has to take charge in these situations. I stepped closer to the desk, noting how he subtly shifted to block my view. And that someone has to be you? Who else? Your brother Derek's too busy with his cases and you... He paused, giving me that patronizing look I'd grown to hate. Well, you have your little paintings to worry about. Little paintings that Grandma believed in enough to... To what? He straightened, suddenly all business. To support your hobby? That's sweet, but this is about family legacy now. Real responsibility. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. What are you saying? I'm saying that managing a multi-million-dollar estate requires more than artistic sensitivity. He closed the drawer with a decisive click. It needs someone who understands business, law, family duty. You mean someone male? The words shot out before I could stop them. His laugh was cold. Don't make this about gender, Amara. This is about capability. What would you do with that kind of money? Waste it on art supplies? That's not your decision to make. Grandma made her wishes clear. Did she? He pulled out a document from his jacket pocket. Because I have here a recent amendment to her will. Quite legitimate, signed and witnessed. Gives me full control as executor. My heart stopped. That's impossible. She would have told me. She was protecting you, dear. Women like you need guidance, structure. He patted my shoulder as he walked past. Don't worry, I'll make sure you're taken care of. A modest monthly allowance should suffice. I grabbed his arm. Show me that amendment. He pulled away, straightening his expensive suit. Everything will be properly presented at tomorrow's reading, though I'd appreciate your discretion about this conversation, family unity and all that. As he reached the door, he paused. Oh, and Amara? You might want to start looking for a real job. Your grandmother's generosity won't be funding your artistic pursuits anymore. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving me alone in the study that still smelled of Grandma's jasmine perfume. My hands shook as I walked to her desk, running my fingers along the polished wood where she'd sat countless times, telling me stories of strong women who'd fought for their place in the world. I won't let him win, I whispered to the empty room. I promise, Grandma. I pulled out my phone and opened my recent calls. There was one person who might help, though reaching out to her was risky. My cousin Geraldine had always been the family's perfect daughter, but lately I'd caught glimpses of rebellion in her eyes during family gatherings. My finger hovered over her number as Mauricio's words echoed in my head. Women like you need guidance. I thought of my grandmother's proud smile when I sold my first painting, her fierce belief in my talent. Before I could second-guess myself, I hit dial. It rang 3 times before she answered. Amara, is everything okay? I took a deep breath. No, Geraldine, it's not. And I think you might be the only person who can help me prove it. There was a long pause before she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. This is about Uncle Mauricio, isn't it? Yes. Can you meet me somewhere private? Another pause. The coffee shop on 4th Street. Tomorrow morning early. Come alone. As I hung up, I caught my reflection in the window, shoulders straight, jaw set, eyes blazing with determination. Mauricio had no idea what he'd just started. He thought he could dismiss me as just another silly girl with a paintbrush. He was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. The coffee shop was empty except for a barista who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. I arrived 15 minutes early, chose a corner table with a clear view of both exits, and ordered a coffee I didn't plan to drink. My stomach was too knotted for caffeine. Geraldine walked in exactly on time, looking perfectly put together in her designer suit. She'd always been the family's golden child, straight A's through law school, perfect posture, perfect manners. But today, there were cracks in that polished facade. "You look terrible," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Thanks. You should see how I feel." She ordered a green tea, waited for the barista to retreat, then leaned forward. "Tell me everything." I did. By the time I finished describing my conversation with Mauricio, her perfectly manicured nails were drumming an angry rhythm on the table. "That bastard," she muttered, then caught herself, glancing around. "Sorry, but this doesn't surprise me, not really." "What do you mean?" She pulled out her phone, tapped through a few screens, then showed me a photo of a document. "Look familiar?" My heart jumped. It was the amendment Mauricio had waved in my face. "Where did you get this?" "Dad's printer queue. He forgot I have access to his home office network." She smiled thinly. "Being the good daughter has its advantages." "Is it legitimate?" "The signatures look real, but—" She hesitated. "The timing is suspicious. This was drafted 3 days before Grandma's death, when she was barely conscious in the hospital." My hands clenched around my untouched coffee cup. "So he forced her to sign it? Or worse?" Geraldine's voice dropped to a whisper. "But proving that won't be easy." "Why are you helping me?" I had to ask. "This could blow back on your whole family." She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her tea. "Remember last Christmas? When I showed everyone my acceptance letter to the art history program?" I nodded. It had been quite the scandal, Geraldine wanting to study something other than law. Dad said the same thing to me that Uncle Mauricio said to you. "Women like you need guidance." Her laugh was bitter. "I withdrew my application the next day. Been his perfect little legal eagle ever since." "I'm sorry, Geraldine. I didn't know." "Nobody does. But watching you pursue your art, stand up to them all these years—" She met my eyes. "Maybe it's time someone stood up to them properly." "It'll be dangerous," I warned. "If we get caught—" "Please." She rolled her eyes. "I've been covering my tracks since I was 12, sneaking art supplies to you behind Dad's back. But we need to be smart about this." She pulled out a small notebook and began writing. "First, we need access to Grandma's financial records, all of them. Dad's been spending a lot of late nights at the office lately, which isn't normal for him. You think he's hiding something? I think they both are. Last week I overheard him talking about offshore accounts." She ripped out the page and slid it across to me. "These are the names of the files I've seen. Mean anything to you?" I studied the list. This one, Project Jasmine. Grandma always wore jasmine perfume. Good catch. Now we just need to— The bell above the door chimed. We both looked up to see Derek walking in, his lawyer's briefcase swinging at his side. Geraldine moved faster than I'd ever seen her, sweeping the paper into her purse. "Well, what a coincidence," Derek said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Sister, cousin, having a nice chat?" "Just catching up," Geraldine said smoothly. "Girl talk." He looked between us. Interesting timing, considering tomorrow's will reading. I stood up, gathering my things. "Don't worry, Derek. We're not plotting a coup." "Course not. That would be stupid." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Almost as stupid as accessing Dad's private network without permission. Right, Geraldine?" The color drained from my cousin's face, but she kept her composure. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Let's keep it that way." He straightened his tie. "Family first, remember?" After he left, Geraldine and I sat in tense silence. Finally, she pulled out her phone and typed something quickly. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Burner phone. Only way to communicate from now on. Delete this message." I looked up to find her already walking toward the door. She paused, not turning around. "Be careful, Amara. They're watching now." As I watched her leave, I felt the weight of what we were undertaking settle onto my shoulders. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about breaking free from a system that had controlled us both for far too long. I deleted the message, Left a tip for the barista and walked out into the morning sunshine. Time to start digging. The storage unit smelled like old books and secrets. I'd only been here once before when Grandma showed me where she kept her important papers. Now, 3 weeks after the disastrous will reading, I was breaking in with a key I'd had copied years ago. My burner phone buzzed. Geraldine's message read, "Dad's in court all day. Mom's at yoga. Coast clear." I pulled out my flashlight and started searching through the stacked boxes. Each one was meticulously labeled in Grandma's elegant handwriting. Tax records, property deeds, investment portfolios. But I was looking for something specific. "Project Jasmine," I muttered, moving deeper into the unit. "Where are you?" My phone buzzed again. Uncle M just arrived at the office, looking agitated. I worked faster, pushing aside old furniture and framed photographs. Then I saw it, a filing cabinet partially hidden behind a dusty mirror. The top drawer was locked, but the bottom one slid open easily. Inside was a single manila folder labeled J. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were bank statements, correspondence, and my heart jumped. A handwritten letter from Grandma dated just weeks before her death. "My dearest Amara," it began. "If you're reading this, something has gone wrong. The men in our family have always believed they know what's best for us women, but they don't know about this account. I've been building it for you in secret for years. Your inheritance protected from their guidance." The next page was a bank statement showing regular transfers to an offshore account. Large transfers. But the most recent statement showed the account had been emptied 2 days before Grandma died. My phone buzzed repeatedly. "Geraldine. Emergency. Uncle M looking for specific files. Mentioned Project J. Get out now." I quickly photographed everything with my phone, put the folder back exactly as I'd found it, and locked up. My heart was pounding as I speed walked to my car. I was 3 blocks away when a black SUV pulled up beside me. The window rolled down to reveal Apollo, our family's longtime lawyer. "Amara? What a surprise." His smile was practiced, professional. "Taking a walk in this industrial area?" "Just checking out potential studio spaces." I lied smoothly. "You know how expensive downtown rent is." "Indeed." He studied me for a moment. "Your uncle's been asking about you. Concerned about your adjustment to the new arrangements." How thoughtful of him. "Tell him I'm adjusting just fine." "He'd prefer to tell you himself. Why don't you join us for dinner tonight? Your Aunt Nora's making her famous lasagna." A trap, obviously, but refusing would be more suspicious. "Sounds lovely. What time?" 7 sharp. He started to roll up his window, then paused. "Oh, and Amara, that storage facility has security cameras. Just something to keep in mind." My blood ran cold as he drove away. I immediately texted Geraldine, "They know. Dinner trap tonight at 7. Her response came quickly. "Don't panic. Found something huge. Meeting needed. Usual place, 1 hour." The usual place was a tiny art supply store downtown where I taught weekend classes. The owner owed me a favor and never asked questions when I used the back room. Geraldine was already there when I arrived, pacing nervously. "Show me what you found first," she said. I pulled up the photos on my phone. As she scrolled through them, her eyes widened. "This matches perfectly," she said, pulling papers from her bag. "Look at these transfer dates. The money from Grandma's secret account, it went straight into Dad's private offshore account. Then he transferred it all to Uncle Mauricio the day before they filed that suspicious will amendment. Can we prove it's the same money? Better." She showed me another document. "They didn't report any of it to the IRS. We're talking serious tax fraud here." "That's how we get them," I realized. "Not through the will, through the IRS." "Exactly. But we need help." She handed me a business card. "Sydney Hernandez, senior IRS investigator, known for being incorruptible and having a particular interest in family trust fraud. You've done your homework. Always do." She checked her watch. "You should go home and change for dinner. Play it cool. Let them think their intimidation worked." "What about the security cameras Apollo mentioned?" "Already handled. Amazing how often those systems have technical difficulties when you know the right people." She squeezed my arm. "Be careful tonight. They're scared, which makes them dangerous." I nodded, tucking the business card into my pocket. "Geraldine, thank you for everything." "Don't thank me yet." Her smile was grim. The real fight's just beginning. As I drove home to prepare for dinner, I thought about Grandma's letter. She'd tried to protect me, to ensure my independence. Now it was my turn to fight, not just for my inheritance, but for every woman in our family who'd been told to stay in her place. Tonight I'd smile and eat lasagna and play the dutiful niece. But tomorrow? Tomorrow I'd make a call to Sydney Hernandez and start the avalanche that would bury their carefully constructed house of lies. The lasagna sat like lead in my stomach as I watched Mauricio hold court at the dinner table. Nora kept refilling wine glasses with mechanical precision, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. "Really, Amara," Mauricio was saying, "you should consider taking that paralegal position I mentioned. Something stable, respectable." I forced a polite smile. "I'll think about it, Uncle." "Think quickly. Your current situation won't sustain you forever." The doorbell rang, cutting through the tension. Nora jumped up to answer it, but Derek was already striding toward the foyer. A moment later, I heard Geraldine's voice, followed by harsh whispers. They returned together, Derek's hand firmly gripping Geraldine's arm. Her face was pale, but her chin was raised defiantly. "Look who I caught trying to sneak into my office today," Derek announced, pushing Geraldine into an empty chair. "Care to explain, little sister?" Mauricio's fork clattered against his plate. "What?" "I found her going through your private files, Dad. The ones about Project Jasmine." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Nora's wine glass trembled slightly as she set it down. "Is this true?" Mauricio asked quietly. Geraldine lifted her chin higher. Someone had to look into what really happened to Grandma's money. "Careful, daughter." Mauricio's voice was deadly soft. "Family loyalty is everything." "Is it? Is that why you and Uncle Mauricio stole Amara's inheritance?" I gripped my napkin under the table, heart racing. This wasn't part of the plan. "Stolen?" Mauricio laughed, but there was an edge to it. "I'm protecting this family's legacy from those who would squander it on frivolous pursuits." By committing tax fraud, the words burst out of me before I could stop them. Silence fell like a hammer. Mauricio's face darkened as he turned to me. "So that's what this is about. You've corrupted my daughter with your bitter accusations." "She didn't corrupt anyone," Geraldine snapped. "I found the evidence myself. The offshore accounts, the hidden transfers." "Enough!" Mauricio slammed his hand on the table. Wine glasses rattled. "You ungrateful children have no idea what it takes to protect a family's interests." "Mauricio," Nora whispered, "perhaps we should—" "Be quiet." He turned back to us. "You want to play detective? Fine. Derek, call Apollo. Have him begin proceedings to formally disinherit both of them." "You can't do that," I said. "Watch me. And Geraldine?" His voice turned cruel. "Pack your things. You're clearly not ready for the responsibilities of the firm, or this family." Geraldine stood slowly. "You're right about one thing, Dad. I'm not ready for this family, because I don't want to be part of a criminal enterprise." "Sit down," Derek ordered, reaching for her arm again. She yanked away. "Don't touch me. I've already sent copies of everything to my personal email. Try anything, and it all goes public." "You're bluffing," Mauricio said, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "Try me." She walked to the door, then turned back. "By the way, the IRS is very interested in family trust fraud cases. Just something to think about." After she left, chaos erupted. Mauricio and Derek argued in harsh whispers while Nora methodically cleared plates, her hands shaking slightly. I sat frozen, watching it all unravel. "This isn't over," Derek said, pointing at me. "You've destroyed this family." "No," I stood up slowly. "You did that yourselves." I found Geraldine waiting in her car around the corner. She was crying silently, mascara running down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she said as I got in. "I couldn't take it anymore. The lies, the manipulation." "It's okay." I squeezed her hand. "But we need to move fast now. They'll try to destroy the evidence." "Already handled." She wiped her eyes. "Everything's backed up in 3 different places, and I called Sydney Hernandez before dinner. She's meeting us tomorrow morning." My phone buzzed, a text from Nora. "Be careful. M making calls, destroying papers. Need to talk. We'll contact soon." "Look." I showed Geraldine the message. She nodded grimly. "We might have an unexpected ally, but first, you can't go home. They'll be watching your place." "I know." I'd packed a bag that morning, just in case. What about you? I've got a friend's couch lined up. She started the car. We knew this might happen, Amara. No turning back now. As we drove away from the house I'd once loved visiting, I watched Mauricio's silhouette in the window, phone pressed to his ear. He'd thought he could bully us into submission, just like he'd done all our lives. But he'd forgotten something crucial. Sometimes the people you underestimate the most are the ones who finally bring you down. Ready for war? Geraldine asked quietly. I thought of Grandma's letter, of all the women in our family who'd been silenced. They have no idea what's coming. Sydney Hernandez didn't look like someone who struck fear into the hearts of tax evaders. She was a petite woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, calmly sipping coffee in the federal building's cafeteria, but her eyes were sharp as she reviewed our evidence. This is quite the family drama, she said, spreading out the documents we'd brought. But more importantly, it's quite the paper trail. Can you help us? Geraldine asked. She hadn't slept much. None of us had. Sydney tapped the offshore account statements. These transfers alone are suspicious, but combined with the timing of your grandmother's amended will, she looked up at us. You realize this could send your father and uncle to prison? We know, I said quietly. And you're prepared for that? Geraldine's phone buzzed. She checked it, then went pale. They're moving faster than we thought. Dad just called an emergency board meeting at the firm. To cover their tracks, I guessed. Sydney gathered the papers efficiently. Then we move faster. I'm opening an official investigation immediately. But I need you both to understand something. She leaned forward. Once this starts, I can't stop it, even if you change your minds. We understand, I said. Good. Because she stopped as someone approached our table. It was Nora, looking exhausted but determined. I hoped I'd find you here, she said, sliding into an empty chair. We need to talk. Sydney raised an eyebrow. And you are? Mauricio's wife, and I have something you need to see. She pulled out a USB drive. Everything. Account numbers, transfer dates, emails discussing how to hide the money. Mauricio keeps it all in an encrypted folder on his personal laptop. How did you get this? Geraldine asked. A bitter smile crossed Nora's face. 25 years of marriage teaches you a lot about a person, including their passwords. She turned to Sydney. I want immunity. That can be arranged, Sydney said carefully, if this information proves valuable. It will, and there's more. Nora's hands trembled slightly. The night before your grandmother died, I overheard Mauricio and Apollo discussing the will amendment. She never signed it. They forged her signature. The cafeteria seemed to spin around me. They what? She was barely conscious by then. They knew she'd never agree to cut you out, Amara. So they waited until... Nora swallowed hard. I should have said something sooner. I'm sorry. Sydney was already pulling out her phone. This changes everything. We need to move now, before they can destroy more evidence. She stood up. Mrs. Warner, you'll need to come with me to make an official statement. Wait, Geraldine said. What about the board meeting? Already handled, Nora replied. I sent an anonymous tip to the firm's ethics committee this morning. They're waiting to ambush Mauricio with their own investigation. My phone buzzed. A text from Derek. You've gone too far. Hope you're happy destroying this family. I showed it to Geraldine. She checked her own phone and smiled grimly. Dad's sending similar threats. They know something's wrong. Sydney gathered her things. I'm calling in a team. We'll execute search warrants within the hour. You two should stay somewhere safe. They can come to my sister's house, Nora offered. Mauricio doesn't know where she lives. As we left the federal building, I saw Apollo's car pulling into the parking lot. He spotted us, and his eyes widened in recognition. He's here to warn them, Geraldine said. Too late, Sydney replied, already walking toward him with her badge out. Mr. Morrison, we need to talk about your role in some questionable financial transactions. We watched from Nora's car as Apollo was escorted inside, his carefully constructed confidence crumbling. It's really happening, I whispered. Nora started the car. Yes, and there's no going back. She glanced at Geraldine in the rearview mirror. Are you okay, sweetheart? No, Geraldine admitted, but I will be. We all will be. As we drove away, my phone buzzed one final time, a message from an unknown number. Your grandmother would be proud. S. Sydney had already started her work, and soon our family's carefully guarded secrets would be exposed to the light. I thought about Mauricio's face when he realized his control was slipping away, about all the times he'd dismissed me as just a silly girl with a paintbrush. What happens now? Geraldine asked quietly. Now? I watched the federal building shrink in the side mirror. Now we watch justice happen. Nora reached over and squeezed my hand, and then we rebuild. The right way this time. Outside, storm clouds were gathering over the city. Perfect weather for a reckoning. The news broke like a tsunami. Prominent law family under federal investigation, screamed the headlines. I watched it unfold from Nora's sister's living room, where Geraldine and I had been holed up for 3 days. They're searching the offices now, Geraldine said, eyes glued to her laptop. Someone's live streaming it on social media. Look, they're carrying out boxes of files. My phone rang, Sydney's number. Turn on channel 7, she said without preamble. You'll want to see this. We switched on the TV just in time to see Mauricio being led out of the firm's building in handcuffs. His perfect suit was wrinkled, his face twisted with rage as reporters shouted questions. No comment, Apollo shouted, trying to shield him from the cameras. My client maintains his innocence. Your client? A new voice cut through the chaos. The camera swung to show Derek pushing through the crowd. You're under investigation too, Apollo. Or did you forget your role in all this? Derek, shut up, Mauricio snapped. But Derek was unraveling fast, his carefully styled hair falling in his face as he jabbed a finger at the cameras. You want to know what really happened? Ask them about Grandma's will. Ask them about the forged signatures. The reporters erupted into fresh chaos. Geraldine covered her mouth with her hand. Oh God, he's cracking. Your brother's been singing like a canary since we picked him up an hour ago, Sydney said through the phone. Apparently, being the family golden boy comes with detailed knowledge of every illegal transaction. On screen, Mauricio was being forced into a police car while Derek continued his public meltdown. They made me help hide the money, said it was my duty to the family. But you know what? Family doesn't do this to family. We need you both to come in, Sydney continued. Make official statements, but wait until... A loud bang made us all jump. Someone was pounding on the front door. Open up, I know you're in there. It was Apollo's voice, slurred and desperate. Geraldine quickly muted the TV. We heard Nora's sister Maria arguing with him through the door. You need to leave before I call the police. They're already coming for me anyway. Another bang. Let me talk to them. They have to understand. We did it for the family. I texted Sydney. Apollo at the house. Drunk. Threatening. Her response was immediate. Units en route. Do not engage. Hide and wait. Geraldine and I retreated to the back bedroom as Maria continued arguing. Suddenly there was a crash of breaking glass. He's coming in through the side window, Geraldine whispered. The security alarm. The house erupted in piercing beeps. We heard stumbling footsteps, Maria yelling, then Apollo's voice getting closer. You ungrateful brats, we gave you everything. He was coming up the stairs. Your grandmother wanted this. She knew women can't handle real responsibility. I grabbed Geraldine's arm and pulled her into Maria's walk-in closet, shutting the door quietly. Through the slats, we watched Apollo stagger into the bedroom, his expensive suit stained and torn. Come out, he shouted, yanking open the bathroom door. You have to sign these papers. Say it was all a mistake. Sirens wailed in the distance. Apollo spun around, wild-eyed, clutching a crumpled stack of documents. Last chance. He was practically foaming at the mouth. Sign these retractions or you'll what? I stepped out of the closet, Geraldine right behind me. Forge our signatures too? He lunged forward but stumbled over his own feet, crashing into the dresser. The papers scattered across the floor. You don't understand, he slurred, trying to gather them up. Your grandmother trusted me, trusted us to keep the money in the right hands. Liar. Geraldine's voice was steel. I saw the real trust documents. She wanted Amara to have everything. Because she was senile. Apollo struggled to his feet. Women and money. It never ends well. We had to protect. The bedroom door burst open. 2 police officers rushed in, weapons drawn. Hands where we can see them. Apollo tried to run but tripped over his own feet again. As they cuffed him, he started crying. I was just following orders. Mauricio said, Save it for your statement. One officer cut him off. You have the right to remain silent. After they led him away, Sydney appeared in the doorway. Well, that's another one down. You okay? I nodded, still shaking slightly. Did you get all that on camera? She smiled, pointing to the small brooch on her lapel. Every word, his drunk confession about following Mauricio's orders, priceless evidence. Geraldine was examining the scattered papers. These are confession statements, pre-written, just waiting for our signatures. She looked up at Sydney. They really thought they could intimidate us into taking the blame. They're not used to women fighting back, I said. Well, they better get used to it. Sydney checked her phone. Because tomorrow, we're going public with everything. Every document, every recording, every piece of evidence. What about Dad? Geraldine asked quietly. He's next. Sydney's eyes were sympathetic but firm. No one's above the law, not even family. Outside, more sirens wailed. The storm we'd started was far from over. The courthouse steps were packed with reporters when we arrived for the hearing. Camera flashes exploded like lightning as Sydney escorted us through the crowd. Inside, the hallway was eerily quiet, our heels clicking against marble floors. Ready? Sydney asked, pausing outside courtroom 3. I looked at Geraldine, who nodded firmly. Ready. The courtroom was already full. Mauricio and his remaining lawyers sat at one table, while Derek and Apollo were separated at another with their own counsel. They all looked up as we entered. Mauricio's face darkened with rage, but he couldn't speak. The judge had ordered a no-contact rule between all parties. All rise. The bailiff called as Judge Martinez entered. What followed was 2 hours of devastating testimony. Sydney's team presented evidence methodically, building an airtight case of fraud, forgery, and tax evasion. Bank records flashed across screens. Emails were read aloud. Apollo's drunken confession played on video. Then came the moment we'd been waiting for. Nora took the stand. Mrs. Warner, the prosecutor began, please tell us about the night of your mother-in-law's death. Mauricio leaned forward, eyes boring into his wife. She didn't look at him. I was at the hospital, Nora said clearly. Mauricio and Apollo arrived around midnight. They had papers with them. The amended will? Yes, but she was unconscious, had been all day. Nora's voice cracked. I watched them forge her signature. Mauricio said it was for the best, that women couldn't be trusted with the family legacy. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Mauricio's lawyer jumped up. Objection. Hearsay. Overruled. Judge Martinez said, continue, Mrs. Warner. They didn't know I was recording them on my phone. Nora pulled out her phone, handed it to the bailiff. I kept it all these years, afraid to come forward, but I couldn't stay silent anymore. The recording played through the courtroom speakers. Mauricio's voice clear as day. Just copy her signature from the old documents. No one will know. We'll say she was lucid when she signed. Apollo. But if we get caught, we won't. Women like Amara don't fight back. They accept what they're given. I watched Mauricio's face crumple as his own words condemned him. Beside him, his lawyer was frantically scribbling notes. Next came the financial evidence. Sydney testified about the offshore accounts, the hidden transfers, the years of tax evasion. With each revelation, Mauricio seemed to shrink smaller in his expensive suit. Finally, it was my turn. Ms. Warner, the prosecutor said, please tell us about your grandmother's true intentions for her estate. I pulled out Grandma's letter from the storage unit. She left me this letter, explaining everything. She knew they might try something like this. That's why she created the secret account. Objection. Mauricio's lawyer again. This letter wasn't in the official estate inventory. Because your client hid it, Sydney interrupted, producing more documents, along with these original will documents showing Ms. Warner as the primary beneficiary. Judge Martinez reviewed everything carefully, then looked at Mauricio. Would the defendant like to make a statement before I rule? Mauricio stood slowly, straightening his tie one last time. Your Honor, everything I did was to protect our family's legacy. Women are too emotional to... That's enough. The judge's voice could have frozen fire. I've heard all I need to hear. She turned to the bailiff. Take them into custody. What followed was chaos. Mauricio lunged across the table, screaming about family betrayal. Derek broke down, sobbing. Apollo just sat there, staring into space as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. The estate will be returned to its rightful heir, Judge Martinez announced over the commotion, with interest and damages to be determined at a later hearing. Outside, reporters swarmed again, but Sydney kept them back. Through the crowd, I spotted Nora standing alone, watching her husband being led to a police van. "I'm sorry," I said, reaching her side. She shook her head. "Don't be. He did this to himself. To all of us." She squeezed my hand. "Your grandmother would be proud of you. Both of you," she added as Geraldine joined us. "What happens now?" Geraldine asked. "Now," Sydney said, appearing beside us, "we clean up the mess. The firm will need new leadership, someone with integrity." She looked meaningfully at Geraldine. "Me?" Geraldine laughed nervously, "but I wanted to study art history." "Why not both?" I suggested. "Change the firm from the inside. Make it something Grandma would have been proud of." Rain started falling as we walked down the courthouse steps. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, but all I could think about was Grandma's letter. "They don't know about this account. I've been building it for you in secret for years." She'd known. She'd planned. She'd trusted me to fight back. Behind us, the police vans pulled away, carrying with them the men who'd thought they could control us forever. Their time was over. Ours was just beginning. The moving crew carried the last of Grandma's antique furniture into her study. My study now. Every piece back where it belonged, as if they'd never been taken away. I ran my hand along her desk, remembering all the times I'd watched her work here. "The movers need signatures," Geraldine said from the doorway. She looked different now, still polished, but softer somehow. More herself. I signed the papers and handed them back. "How's the firm?" "Changing." She smiled. "Just hired 3 female partners. Dad would have hated it." "Good." My phone buzzed. Sydney, sending her weekly update. The trials were over, but the aftermath continued. Mauricio had gotten 15 years for fraud and conspiracy. Apollo took a plea deal for 10. Derek was serving 5, with mandatory counseling. "Still feels strange," Geraldine said, settling into one of the leather chairs. "Being on this side of things." "Regrets?" "None." She pulled out her tablet. "Actually, that's why I'm here. The board approved my sabbatical. I start art history classes next semester." I looked up from unpacking a box of Grandma's photos. "Really? What changed their minds?" "Nora did. She's taken over as chairwoman, remember? Said it's time the firm embraced more than just law." She paused. "She's also pushing to fund an art scholarship in Grandma's name." The doorbell rang before I could respond. It was Maria carrying a familiar jasmine plant. "Nora thought you might want this back," she said, setting it on the windowsill. "It's from your grandmother's greenhouse." The scent filled the room immediately, bringing memories flooding back. But they didn't hurt anymore. "Perfect timing," I said. "Help me hang this?" I pulled out my latest painting, the one I'd been working on throughout the trials. A portrait of Grandma, but not like the formal ones hanging in the firm's hallways. This one showed her in her greenhouse, surrounded by her beloved jasmine, sunlight catching the silver in her hair. "It's beautiful," Maria whispered. "It's you," Geraldine added. "The way she looked at you, believed in you. You captured it perfectly." The doorbell rang again. This time it was Sydney, looking decidedly unofficial in jeans and a sweater. "Thought I'd find you all here," she said, stepping inside. "Just got word. The IRS finished processing the offshore accounts. The restitution payments will start next week." "I don't care about the money anymore," I said truthfully. "Good, because your grandmother's letter mentioned something about using it to start an arts foundation?" Sydney raised an eyebrow. "Supporting young artists who face, what did she call it? Family resistance to creative pursuits?" Geraldine laughed. She really did think of everything. She did. I stepped back from the painting, seeing it with fresh eyes. "You know what the best revenge is? Living exactly the life they said you couldn't have." Speaking of which, Sydney pulled out an envelope. "The gallery downtown? They want to show your work, all of it, especially this one." I opened the letter, read it twice. A solo show. My first. "They said your recent pieces speak to themes of justice, family, and female empowerment," Sydney continued. "Can't imagine where that came from." We all laughed, the sound echoing through rooms that had been too quiet for too long. "I'll handle the contracts," Geraldine offered. "Pro bono, of course." "And I'll help with the opening," Maria added. "Nora, too, if you want." I looked around the study, at Grandma's desk where I'd now write my own story, at her jasmine filling the air with possibility, At these women who'd stood with me when everything fell apart. Actually, I said, I want to do something different for the opening. I explained my idea. When I finished, they were all smiling. 2 weeks later, the gallery was packed. But it wasn't just another art show. Between my paintings hung photographs and documents, evidence of the fraud, copies of forged signatures, bank statements showing stolen money. Each piece of art paired with the truth it grew from. The centerpiece was Grandma's portrait, flanked by her final letter and the justice it sparked. Beneath it, a plaque read, "To every woman told to stay in her place, make your own place." Nora appeared beside me, champagne in hand. They're calling it justice in color. The critics love it. What do you think Mauricio would say? Who cares? She clinked her glass against mine. He lost his power to define us. Through the crowd, I watched Geraldine showing her art history professor around, gesturing enthusiastically at each piece. Sydney was deep in conversation with aspiring female lawyers. Maria and her sister were already planning the next show. The jasmine perfume I wore, Grandma's signature scent, caught the evening air. For the first time since her death, it didn't remind me of loss. It smelled like victory.